Hi, everybody. Welcome to About Creative Experience, the podcast for photographers, designers, artists, or anybody trying to live a more creative life. Today, we're going to be speaking to my good friend Charlotte about her fashion photography career. That's not what we're doing at all. We're talking about my friend Charlotte about her wedding photography career. Let me start that again. You see, I told you we don't
I
have
was
to
like,
worry about it.
really?
You're like, wait a minute, am
Like,
I really though?
Mom, you're
Yeah,
setting me up.
I am setting you up. This was not meant to be a disaster. This is more my brain being a noodle. But like I said, at least this way around, you know that it's not just you that can slip up. So I'll probably put this in as a blooper somewhere. Right, let's cut that.
My face. You know, it's like that interview of the guy that wasn't at all the right person on BBC, and they go, and then he's like, completely been like
No, that's
set
not
up.
me.
It was like, am I?
I'll start that again. Okay. Hi everybody. Welcome to About Creative Experience, the podcast for photographers, designers, artists, and anybody looking to live a more creative life. Today I'm going to be speaking to my good friend Charlotte, an incredible wedding photographer with soulful images and character, multiply featured in Vogue, and very much one of the most stylish photographers I've ever had the good fortune of working with. Without further ado, Charlotte, would you like to say hello to the podcast peeps?
Introduction. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, sorry for the kind of like grandiose side of it, but obviously for the people that don't know you, Charlotte, can you tell people who you are and a little bit about the kind of photography that you do?
Yeah, so briefly about me, I grew up in Paris and my mum sent me to the UK when I was 15 to learn English. It was only meant to be a year, but I ended up staying. So I'm originally French and I studied fashion design at university and I ended up staying in England since. Yeah, that's a little bit about me briefly.
I mean, that's going quite a long way back there. You definitely would not know English was not your first language, although you can definitely hear the French. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of a lovely Parisian lilt.
Currently staying in Paris, so my French is coming back slowly. But someone said the other day that I had a Belgium accent, which is not a compliment in France. She's like, you must have been in the UK for too long. You've got a sort of slight Belgium twang.
You see, any Belgians listening, we don't mean it.
So sorry.
No, honestly, it's fine. I get
It's a bit
it.
of a joke, like a French Belgian joke. Sorry.
That's it. I mean, the Belgians have got the beer to make up for it, so I'm sure they won't be too offended. The chocolate and yeah, it's all good.
Let's hope.
So obviously that's like long history, but in terms of like creative work and the kinds of things you've done during your career, have you always been a photographer? Where did your career start?
So I wouldn't say like in terms of film photography, I I guess I come from a generation of disposable camera, and my mum loved to send me away at a very young age. Send me to Iceland, I think, when I was 6 on my own. I mean, I met a friend at school who was, from Iceland. So my mum was like, "Why don't you go and stay with her for 3 weeks?" And she packed a couple of disposable camera in my bag, and I guess that sort of film journey came from that. Every time, being away, she'll, send me off with a couple of disposable camera. And I was always so excited to go and drop it off. Or my mum used to go and drop them off at the time, like the kind of French equivalent of snappy snaps. And I get the photos back. I love to say that I had, my dad gave me his beautiful, but I didn't get any kind of cameras. Although my stepdad has a Canon A1, I think, but he never gave it to me. He gave it to my sister. So I think when I got to college, maybe bought not a disposable. I got one of these, point and shoot cameras in a charity shop. I grew up in Hastings, and there was a lot of great charity shops. And then I guess that kind of took it to a bit more serious from the disposable camera. Kind of carried on from that. And I think that my love for film photography was always just the anticipation of going to a lab at the time, nothing fancy. It was just, something like snappy snaps again. Yeah, I always had such a love for film photography. Obviously, my career was in fashion. I, like a lot of my fashion friends, got very tired of doing fashion, of the industry. And I saw a career coach after a very good friend of mine passed away. So I went to the funeral in Scotland, and I was thinking, I have to book this, call with this career coach. I really have to. I don't want to be tied to London. I want to, have something that gives me more freedom. So I saw this career coach, and you do these exercises, and you send these questionnaires to your friends and family, and people answer questions about you, and everyone said, Charlie, you have to, you kind of stop believing in yourself. You really have to do something more creative. And at the time I was thinking, well, I don't want to do fashion anymore. And I kind of did a bit of interior design with my house, and I thought, I don't want to do interior design. And I love film photography, but what can I do with that? I'm not going to go on, I had a lot of friends who were fashion photographers and worked for free for many years. But one of my passion is surfing. So I had a friend who was a surfer who was shooting weddings, and I kind of said, you can meet me for coffee. So we met for coffee, and he was living quite, he was just so happy. And I mean, he was in his late 40s, he's in his 50s now, and he just was at the happiest time of his life. And he said, I'm in such a good place. I'm loving shooting weddings. I'm going away surfing. You're not tied to one place. In my mind, I kind of thought, oh, shooting weddings. I mean, the only thing that I did love to capture were people and the connections between them. So I thought, oh, that would kind of make sense to transition into shooting weddings, because that's why I really love to capture. I've never been into landscapes or anything like that, but I did really have this idea that wedding photography was quite cheesy, and I just thought, I'm not. Everything makes me cringe. So I just thought, I'm not that person that's going to be like, can you bouquet in the air, girls? So I thought, no, no, I can't. So then I guess, like, actually, that was before the career coach. I think when I did do the career coach, and I was thinking about, well, I think what was I kind of met up with a friend, and she said, have you checked out, I said about the idea of wedding photography. I said, I can't really see myself doing it. She said, have you checked out, Naomi Koenig's work? Because she shot our friend's wedding, and she does it purely on film, very beautiful, so I remember going home and, sitting on, Instagram and looking at Naomi Gokin's work, and I guess some of the other more film documentary style photographers. And I think it was a bit of fun, if this was a film, there'd probably be like a little soundtrack in the back, because it was a real moment of like, wow, like you can shoot weddings like this. And I was just so amazed, and I thought, this is amazing. Like, had no idea this could be done this way. And I actually a bit past that generation, that kind of age where people are getting married, because I'm in my late 30s. So unfortunately, I didn't really have any friends that were getting married where I could be like, can I come and take pictures? But my best friend's little sister was getting married a month later. And I thought, I could go as an extra wedding photographer, as a guest, and say, can I shoot some, which I did. And I felt like I just kind of woken up, because it put me out of my comfort zone, and my mind is quite busy all the time. And it really forced me to be so present. Again, I had very basic knowledge about shooting film, but I kind of trusted my eye. If I saw, something, then, and the more I was, I really wanted to learn more about the technical side. And I thought, is it going to, you know, because then I felt like as soon as I was trying to be quite technical, I was moving away. But then I thought it was quite important to at least, know like quite a lot about the basics, especially because I shoot a lot now in like low light on film. I quickly learned that on film, there's not much room for error. You can't really crop. You really have to meter things quite well. So that was, I guess, the start of my journey into transitioning. Sorry, I don't know if that was a really long answer.
No, it's good. I just wanted the honest answer. I don't care how long it is. Honestly, you covered so much there, and there's a few things that I wanted to pick up on, because you kind of mentioned it almost as if it was nothing, but you said you had a career in fashion. So what did that look?
So I guess I guess my parents were very much about what's your, it was all about, what are you, and at the time I was drawing, dresses of, a lot of dresses, and, you must be a fashion designer. Yes, yes. And I was like, I must be, and then so I kind of studied fashion without really thinking about what would that look like for my life. And I think you quickly learn that the fashion industry is not sustainable in any, like, there's a lot of people that transition from the fashion industry into different careers. But for me, I interned in New York, and I dreamt of having a brand where I would sell in this particular concept store, which at the time is not no more, but it's called Opening Ceremony. I thought one day I'll have my own brand and I'll sell in Opening Ceremony. So when I finished university, I got this opportunity to run a kind of manufacturer studio where we make for designer brands as well as costume for film and theatre. And the owner, who was quite elderly and kind of retiring at the time, said, I know that you want to do your own brand. You're like, I'll help you support. So this is what I was doing until I got to 30. And we got picked up at opening ceremony, which meant that we were selling, in Japan and LA and New York and London. And for me at the time, I just thought, I'm living this dream because this is really what I always wanted, have my own brand and sell there. And it was incredible, from 23. I did this with my best friend, you know, business partner. And at the time, I really was just so happy because it was so creative. Well, probably 10% creative, really, because of the rest, you're slugging, trying to do PR and marketing. At that time, there was no Instagram. So it was very much about the PR and the sales company, which at the time were very expensive. Yeah, I think that's what my fashion journey looked like until I got to 30, where I decided that, again, because there was no Instagram and it was all about having paying sales and PR company a couple of £1,000 every month, we were just like, this is not going to be sustainable. We're not going to make money of this or even be able to live, comfortably. And also I was quite interested about, sustainability at the time. And I thought, how sustainable is it to have a fashion brand? So this is when I just started solely looking after the manufacturer. Hence why I went down a route of being less creative and it was more about clients and, getting things made for them.
It sounds like for a period of time, at least, though, you were literally living your dream, your kind of like
Yeah.
teenage dream, that's something that most people don't get to experience. That's awesome. Absolutely
I
love
mean,
that.
I remember meeting up with a friend because she was kind of helping us do a PR and she was working for a big PR and sales agency. So she was giving us a bit of, but I remember meeting up and saying, I feel like I can die now. And I think she was so shocked to hear me say that. And she was like, come
That's the
on, it's
most
only the
English thing I've
beginning.
ever heard.
She was like, it's only the beginning. And I was like, oh yeah. But at the time I really felt like, that sense of proving yourself. And, it was very tough. But me doing this with my friend, we were just always bouncing ideas off each other. And it was great. It did really feel like we were living this dream. I remember someone had spoken to me about my brand and they said, do you know about this really amazing brand? And I was like, yeah, it's mine. And she was like, what? And she was like, I can't believe it. So it almost feels like, you've turned into celeb for but I loved it
You
so
see,
much. And I still feel like I'm very proud of what we did. I don't look back and think, no.
and from an outside point of view, obviously, I spend a long time looking at photographers' work. Something that's always stood out to me about you is the way that when you look at a moment, I can tell that you're seeing a lifestyle and you're not seeing just a literal thing in front of you. Like when you photograph, especially women, although all different kinds of people, there's just a sense of kind of relaxed elegance to everything. Even when somebody's in an in between moment where I say it's a moment of high emotion at a wedding, you're not your work never feels like it's about you. It always feels like it's an observation of something stylish, somebody that knows how to hold themselves. It's elevating and helps people to feel more unique and as if they stand out. And hearing you talk about fashion that way and how distinctive your brand was then, I think this is just something that you're capable of, full stop. I don't know many photographers that have got as strong of an eye as you. And it's interesting hearing you talk about Naomi because her work is beautiful without a doubt. But I love the idea of you being given permission to be like, this is the thing that's inside. This is the thing I've loved since being a girl. This is a thing that I was doing as something precious and for me and kind of a trapping of my life. These were the things that I collected. This was the process that I fell in love with. And now you get to give that to other people. And it feels like a gift, honestly.
I feel what fascinates me now in this journey is how, the same events captured by someone different can look completely miles apart. And I think I learned that because I've had a few second shooters now, and I did one where I didn't really know the second shooter. And he, well, not obviously, I was then shooting just everything on film because I thought, well, he can capture everything on digital. And then looking at the day, one, because it's on digital, but looking at what he shot and what I shot, because obviously it looks very different because one is like, pushed film and one is digital with flash. So that's going to look very different anyway. But just what is captured looks like we're not even at the same, this in the same moment. And I just find that so fascinating how things can just look, miles apart because of, someone's eye. And I think that's why it's so important when people go and book, that they really book with someone, whose work resonates with them, because you're going to get a complete different story of your day.
And it's one of those wonderful things that it is a creative expression. So much of it's about applying all of a person's lived experience, all of their technical ability, and then the engagement with the actual event, and it all comes together. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about your journey into weddings as well, because it almost sounds like you were one Instagram session away from not doing it, which would have been a massive shame. So, but obviously, see, you made the decision to get to that first wedding. That was really clear. You kind of went in, you had this horrible life event, you were burnt out from the fashion industry, but obviously still incredibly talented. And then coaching happens, friends and family help encourage you. You find this new direction. You do the first wedding. What is it that keeps you coming back to do the next one? Like, why weddings and not something else? Because you would be amazing as a fashion photographer too.
Oh, I really had no I've seen friends struggle, and they'd been working for 10 years, for free. And for me, since, I started to film photography, I just absolutely love capturing the emotion of people. And that's all I love to capture. I had no interest ever in, shooting a model in a dress. For me, that it didn't resonate with me. I just absolutely can't even, for me, shooting film at weddings is my personal project. That is what I love to do. And when I did this first wedding, and I don't want to sound like cliche or corny, but I felt like I'd kind of woken up, because I lost all confidence in myself since I'd stopped my fashion brand. And putting yourself out of your comfort zone, and for being forced to be so observant and present. I mean, I was very lucky because it was a very beautiful venue, a very beautiful day, and a lot of people that I knew. So everyone felt very comfortable, at me pointing a camera. But it was a real life. And I would just kind of walk up the next day and I felt so excited about life and what I could do now, and I felt like I have to do more of this. And I was very lucky that I had friends in the creative industry, stylists that were doing weddings, who said, come along and, take some pictures. And I offered people to, have an extra photographer to come and shoot film, because they already had a digital photographer, so it made sense.
And that kind of brings us on nicely, because you've touched on this a few times, but it sounds like you're almost exclusively film. So if there is digital, it's there as like a backup to the film. Is that right? Or have I got the wrong end of the stick there?
Yeah, it really, some days, I guess when maybe the light is a little bit more challenging, I'll probably do a bit more digital. Definitely when maybe there's more facial expression. I do like very context wide shot. And I find that when there's more than two people in a frame, you can get a bit of, funny eyes. And I think when it's, say, when there's, yeah, again, when there's a lot of, like, say, cocktail hour and a lot of facial expression, that ready would be really film, ceremony film. I guess it's more like cocktail hour. And then now what I've found is that I just really love to shoot with no flash. But I guess when it's winter weddings and there is really just not much light to work with, natural light, then I'll probably do more like a bit more digital backup. So yeah, in answer to the question, it's a little bit of backup, and probably more when it's facial expression. I do a bit more
That's so
digital.
cool. Honestly, one of the big things that I'm seeing right now is a lot of wedding photographers are digital through and through. And I'm like that. Like, most of my work is digital and has been for a long time. But a lot of those people are now introducing one or two rolls of film. And honestly, if you look at somebody's feed, you might think that most of their work was shot on film. So one of the things that struck me when we first started talking, like probably about 6 months, a year ago now, it was just how often I was looking at the work and realizing that you'd shot every single moment on film. And you mentioned a minute ago that that was actually a benefit, because it meant that you could go to a wedding and only shoot film and be that way that a digital photographer was able to offer this kind of characterful story, like historic medium. But I think that the problem, that a question I know a lot of the listeners will have, is how did you do it? Because for many, it is a scary experience to take a photograph and not be able to see whether you got it right or not.
Yeah.
How do you juggle that on the wedding day?
Yeah, I think that it is quite scary, and it takes quite a lot of courage because there is not much that you can do. I think, I'm not gonna lie, the beginning there I did learn. I think that I was quite lucky because a lot of the clients that, obviously I was an extra photographer doing it on film as well as the digital. And I think actually a lot of clients didn't really notice that imperfectness, that classic, church shot, obviously, which is quite heavily backlit. Sometimes people can look a bit underexposed. But, because I captured this moment and, I guess it wasn't maybe something about that being imperfect. I mean, now I, not really into like an underexposed, but I mean, because it was black and white, it wasn't as noticeable as well, black and white film. But it does take quite a lot of courage. And I think you do have to, know about the basics as well. And now that I do know the basics. I think for me, I was because I thought, I've got to do digital at the beginning, and I was finding when I had a digital camera in my hand, I was losing everything that I loved about shooting weddings because I wasn't really considering, and I was just, especially when I had a zoom one, as you know. And then when I had, prime lenses film, I was really considering, and it was making me shoot in a complete different way. So I had to kind of be honest with myself and see what you're shooting on film is better. I mean, I have, as you know, an old DSLR, which is exactly the same model as my film camera. So at least that was a bit closer to shooting film. Um, because otherwise it was just, I was looking at these digital images that I was taking and I was just like, this is crap, And as soon as I had a film camera in my hand, I was just I just transformed into something different, I think. And then, it's great. It's just whatever you feel works for you. And for me, it was just a film camera.
More than anybody else that I've ever met, I can definitely attest to that being true. Like when I see your digital work, it looks similar. And like with editing work, you can get the color palette to be the same, you can get the grain to be the same, and all the rest of it. But the way that you react to film is different. When you get those files back and you see the scans and it's different to the way you envisioned it, the way you talk about it makes it sound like it's almost better than you could have imagined. So like your imagination is kind of being filled in by these choices that you made in camera or the environment or all these other elements. And I wonder how much of that is to do with your fashion background because I don't know many people that would believe so strongly in aesthetic being the key element right from day one and then stick to it and not let it go. Bravery that comes with that and the belief in the aesthetic being so important is something that I think is missing from some areas of the wedding photography industry. And I think the fact that you had that negative opinion about it at the beginning, it's almost like you refuse. You will not allow your work to become a commodity. You will not allow your work to be anything other than the best that you can produce. And sometimes you're kind of pushing yourself beyond your understanding to experiment and you're doing these wonderful new things. And I see images like on your Instagram, and we'll put a few in the show notes if people want to have a look at some of this stuff while we're talking, because it makes so much more sense with images. But there is a sense of texture and of place and of kind of character to your work that I don't see very readily. We talked a bit about your journey, but to try and put this on a timeline, when did you start shooting weddings?
I guess I just did my first season because I started weddings quite, well, testing whether weddings were working for me kind of quite late into the summer, not this summer, just gone, the one before. So, the first season was really this one just gone. So I'm going to my second full season now.
That's incredible. Like the maturity in your work is something that I know photographers aspire to. Like when I'm doing consultations with people, you're a name that comes up. People look at your work and see it as different. And I think it's such an interesting thing because obviously Naomi inspired you and now you're being an inspiration for other people. That's incredible. With that said, it's kind of interesting because you mentioned that you had friends that were moving into weddings, like makeup artists, stylists, that kind of
Mm.
thing. And so did a lot of your early clients come through those connections then? Is that how you found your people?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was very lucky that I had, again, like a friend who is quite a big stylist, and she was doing quite incredible weddings. So, I was really lucky. And, she believed in me too, to recommend me to those clients as well. So that's how I've really, got I went into it really because of those contacts.
It's interesting as well because you can tell that the people in your photographs have a sense of aesthetic. And that's not something that's common to all people. And it's one of the things I love about hearing people's journey, because if somebody looked at you from the outside, they would think, oh my word, this growth is unprecedented. But it's pretty clear that what we're seeing is the result of an entire career before this, like taste that you developed over years and years and years, and this desire to do something meaningful and give somebody something that isn't compromised, that does draw on these elements of fashion and style and place and emotion.
For me, that's something that I've found is really important now is storytelling. So I guess an input is most important. That's my real, thing now is like how I'm telling this story. So I put quite a lot of time in to putting a story together. I edit quite tightly. And for me, how is each image going to work next to the next in terms of energy, in terms of how the viewer, obviously the couple and their friends and family are going to read it from start to finish. I really think, what's the end picture? What's the beginning? Where are we? And I edit quite lightly, and then I've kind of pulled in my friend who's a creative director to do the final calling because I'm like, please, I just need a set of fresh eye, and she's just incredibly, just the most creative person that she's just incredible. So we'll kind of have a final look over, is this looking quite well as a story? And, the same things that we're noticing is like that pop of red you know, in the corner with the way that the hand is going. And, this like noticing these things that it's great because she's not a photographer, but she has this real creative eye. And it's then giving me that fresh set of eyes that I need for myself to look at it again after I've been looking at it over for a week. Is this working as a story? Is this relevant? Is this too much? Is it not enough? I mean, usually it's too much and I really narrow it down. So I think, yeah, I'm really just looking at things because of obviously like the candid moments, but also like textures and colors and how are things looking rather than like this, perfect kind of like, bouquet of, you know,
Yeah. It's not your
just
work's not literal.
aperture and
Your work
yeah,
always
I think
strikes
it's
me as being story led and concept driven in some cases. Like when you look through the work, everything feels harmonious. You said that you edit quite tightly. Like typically, how many images do you deliver from a wedding?
so in 10 hours, it probably, so from get ready to dancing, it'll be like around 400. If there's a second shooter, which there's been on a few times, if it's quite a spread out venue and there's over 100 guests, then there will probably be more around 550 images. So yeah, I like to just for me there's no need to have the same image. There's more than like a few images in the same moment because it just makes having fewer just really makes everything look a lot stronger.
And also, you mentioned that you've got a creative director coming in to help you to select the moments to make sure that narrative is maintained throughout, which I think is really interesting. I know a lot of photographers are in a very different boat. They'll cover very large events and all the rest of it, and they can deliver thousands of photographs from a wedding. But it is a very different approach. And one of the things I love, again, it's all coming back to this kind of very intentional way of working. You recognized, okay, I need to shoot this on film because that's where the feeling is. That's where the emotion is for me. It's where I'm getting what I want out of this work, and people are going to appreciate it. So that's going to limit you in terms of how many frames you can shoot because you can't shoot 10,000 photographs because you go
Mm.
broke. Everybody would. And then you kind of think, okay, so I'm limited, or how do I make this even more special? Well, I don't repeat moments. Well, how do I make sure that's correct? I'll bring in a creative director to help me to curate. And it's kind of like at every stage of your process, you're choosing the most tasteful option. Like if there's a choice between an easy way or a way that's more difficult or more expensive, but is going to make your artwork stand more strongly. Every single time, it's like you're making that choice to put the client first and allow the deliverable to be as characterful and interesting and timeless as
Yeah,
possible.
because I'm paying my friend, and she's very generous with her time, but I can't expect her to. So, if she's I've kind of brought her in because I thought I need someone who is going to have that extra set of eyes, who's going to have the, not look at it from again like a technical, but I know that she's incredibly creative, again, just amazing. And, to have brought her in now to just have that final look over the images to make sure that it really works really well as a story, has really been, I find, then made the end gallery a lot stronger.
That's it, and it's stunning that you've chosen that. You've mentioned technical elements a few times, so let's cover over some of that side of it because I'm sure that people would want to know a little bit. So, in terms of like cameras, lenses, film stocks, what are you typically using on a wedding day? Are we talking like SLRs? Are we talking rangefinders? What kind of
So
cameras?
I got Nikons just because my first wedding, I actually borrowed my a film camera from my friend Sophie, who's quite a big, who's a photographer. And I kind of went and she said, here you go, here's some lenses, here's an SLR. And, these lenses were like £1,000 each, and I thought, really, you trust me with this? Hey, here you go. So they worked really beautifully. And I said, well, I'm going to get Nikon, so I got these,
If it works, who cares what it says on the front? If it works, it works.
yeah, and also my again, I had quite a lot of, photographer friends, and he just told me that Nikon was a bit cooler than Canon, so I thought, "Well, there we go, great." Anyway, I tried these Nikon cameras and these Nikon lenses, and they worked really well, so I thought, "I'm get those." At the time, I got a 35 and 58, 1.4. And then I kind of got I got a 20 because I was finding that I did love a context shot, and I was thinking like the 35 is not wide enough, so I got a 28 because I really love that for when there's enough space, really. I'm not really keen on it if it's like a tight space, but if it's quite, I do really, and also it's a 1.8, so it's much lighter than the 35. And then I
It's
also
actually what
got
I'm
an
recording on the podcast on right now as well.
oh, okay.
Anyway,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's, as I was breaking my back with this 35, 1.4 and 58. So, and then I got an 85, which I haven't really used, but I thought because I do really like to do candid, sometimes I find with the 58, I'm just that bit too close and I can hear people whispering, going, the photographer is behind you. And I thought, no, I'm too close. I have to get something a bit, so I didn't get that. And usually I have a kind of, some kind of jackets where I can put, spare lenses. So I mainly it's 28 or 35 and then a 58. But I do think that this season coming, I'm going to try to use the 85 because I really just don't want to hear people say, the photographer is behind you. Because, it's then they
That's
know
such
that
a
I'm taking the picture.
well, and you're trying to safeguard guard the mood of the wedding as well. You don't want it to be about you. It's about them, and you're there to capture it, and you're not invisible. But I
Mm.
totally get that. You don't want to disrupt what's in front of you. Sometimes you just want to be able to see it as it is. So that's
I never
interesting. So
disturb, but I would say it's not like totally 100% documentary. Like a moment will happen and I see something and I'm like, hey, it would be really nice if you did that again. Or that would look really, I kind of maybe thought, oh, that would you do that? And so I wouldn't pose anyone, but sometimes I do have a vision for something and I'm like, oh, it would be really, really nice if, so I would say it's not 100% documentary. I definitely don't want people to know that I'm here taking a picture
no,
of them when it's a candid. Yeah.
you want it to be. You want to be able to react to the natural scene. That makes perfect sense. So
Yeah.
it's two Nikons. Are they F100s,
Yeah.
F5s, or something older?
So I've got well, for me, I've had to go with the autofocus. I've got an F6 as well. And then I'm now going to maybe just move to having two F6 because I do really, yeah, I do need to have something with autofocus because for me, it's about being really quick. And I do find that, unless it's get ready or ceremony where it's a lot more slow, but then it doesn't make sense for me to be carrying these like manual focus cameras and then the autofocus ones. So yeah, really F100 or F6. Then, I had this really old DSLR, which, as you know, was so heavy, it was breaking my back because obviously these, film cameras are quite big already. And I have this DSLR, but then I, got this mirrorless camera. but then I was kind of not enjoying, taking pictures. But I do bring that on when the light is really challenging because you can really just whack the ISO up and, then it's, so I always have that with me. But when I do a bit, when the light is okay, I kind of, and if I want to do digital, I have the DSLR. And then for me, it's almost as if well, almost not really, but it's as close as shooting film as, you know, as I can get. And then
It's
the
interesting. Like in the fashion world, like more and more, I'm seeing photographers going back to DSLRs. There's a bunch of people that I really respect that are shooting on Nikon D850s, and a bunch of D780s, Canon 5D Mark IVs, all that kind of stuff, because they want to be able to look through a viewfinder and see a person and not a screen. And
mm,
it's interesting to me because I remember the first time round and all the downsides and how grateful I was to be able to know that things are in focus and all that kind of stuff. But I can totally understand why you'd want that, because if you had this beautiful, like, connected experience on film, going with mirrorless is putting a computer between you and your subject. And that must be jarring for you.
yeah, I mean, it's not very practical because it's so heavy. I mean, it makes me want to cry when I'm at a wedding and with pain. The mirror. So I will eventually have to think like, mirrorless, because it's, if I'm not shooting that much on digital, is it really worth bringing this really big piece of equipment and carrying it around? That's usually why, I'm like, oh, do more on film. But the mirrorless is really good because it's for like shooting high ISO, like,
Or
if
like
you're at a
dance
wedding in
floor
Italy and there's really low light and you're like, "Whoa, this is really, really, really low. Let's just do a bit of backup on digital," and you can, what, and it's really not a scene for flash at all. We don't really, not really into flash anyway, but especially for these kind of preserving the mood and the ambience. So yeah, I think that DSLR, especially this old one, just to put, sometimes I, when I put the preset on it, I just really, I can't even tell the difference really much between the film photo and the
digital.
digital one.
That makes sense. And we worked, obviously, this is kind of inside baseball, but we did work together for an extended period of time to build that out to match your film. Speaking of film, though, so what kind of film stocks do you prefer?
All right, so yeah, the Portra 400 is obviously a, classic, because for skin tones, that's just going to be amazing. It's obviously like get ready and just for black and white, Tri-X 100, because I think like I like pushing the film, and I think that I quite like something that has contrast and it's quite punchy. So I like quite vibrant colors, and I like something that's quite contrasty. Then I'm really been into Cinestill 800T, because again, I like shooting no flash, and I find that pushing that looks really cinematic, and it works quite well with tungsten light. So it's not, I'm doing less of like the Portra 800. I like Portra 800 maybe when it's getting to like, but it's still working with natural light. So Cinestill, I'm really into at the moment. The wedding that I'm doing, I did quite a lot and Cinestill, and I just find that, yeah, everything looks so cinematic. And then the last one, I guess I quite liked a bit of Image Pro and Ultra Max when it was quite a bright day. Just find, yeah, the colors it's just quite nice to give like a bit of a different, colors and textures throughout the galleries. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love Pro Image 100. I think it's a really underrated film. Honestly, it sounds like you've got. It's almost like you've learned like a vocabulary around this stuff. Like this film stock when I want this look, that film stock when I want that look, and you're choosing them based on taste, which I think it's very hard to explain that to somebody going in. And one of the things that people tend to struggle with film is that they do kind of have this idea that film is going to look a certain way, and when it doesn't, they stop experimenting or get discouraged. So if somebody was going to be coming into film for the first time, is there anything you'd recommend for them to try first, like to help them to get confident shooting on film?
Yeah, I mean, go out and shoot. And my main thing would be just make sure you don't underexpose, especially it's a, very bright but big white sky. You kind of think, "Oh, it's really bright. I don't need to, overexpose the film." Just really, just don't underexpose. As long as you don't underexpose it, surely. But also like working with a lab that you really like, because a lab is going to make so much difference, finding a good lab. to your work. So having a camera that inspires you, and that can be, anything, but as long as you've got a camera that you trust, and then you kind of try out a few film stocks, and then you're like, oh, this I really like the colors in this, and working with a good lab, and make sure you don't underexpose, then I think that's quite a good starting point.
That's
Yeah.
good advice. You can't say fairer than that.
Yeah.
Start with a good lab, pick a film stock that you like, pick a camera you like, and then see what happens. I love that. That's great.
Because you'll really get inspired, and yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of inspiration, obviously right now, like I see your work and I see this, like you said, storytelling element coming through it. I see this very strong sense of aesthetic. Are there any things that you're currently looking to develop in your artwork? Is there a direction you're trying to go in right now, or any changes that you're making?
I guess what I'm really, like I said, I think when I was getting into the wedding world, I emailed Rennie because I came across her work, who founded Counterpart, obsessed with Counterpart photographers. But I emailed Rennie to say, love your work. And I think I emailed Naomi as well. And Rennie just said, one word of advice is find your voice. Just, I did think about it, but I think for me, it was always about, I knew what I liked in terms of maybe colors. I didn't really know the technical side, but I think more and more I'm thinking, what I'm quite careful what I post on Instagram. I think I do like couples portrait, but I just choose not to post them and just post more of what I find interesting. And I've kind of tried to, stay away too. I definitely never looked at wedding photography and thought, oh, that's what works really well. I'm going to do more of that. I really tried to do what I liked. So, finding my own voice. Hopefully, I hope I can one day make images and people think, oh, that's, she's got very strong, that it can tell that she took that
I can
image.
speak for the audience right now. We definitely already can.
Oh,
There are a few
really? That would
people
just
that come in after a year, like one season, and have as strong a voice as you. It's lovely that you're being humble about it. That's fantastic. But if the goal
like,
is to stand out from other people, like congrats, you've already done it. That's awesome.
thank you, because I was thought, I just, I really want it to feel like, wow, actually, someone did send me a message the other day and told me that. And I thought, oh God, that's what I've always wanted since I started. So I was so happy. But also, now the real thing that I'm thinking again is like that storytelling element. That's so important for me. If there's a random image in there, I think, is it relevant? Say there's a picture of the mum coming out, is it, they've got a really beautiful picture of the mum later. Like, this doesn't really make sense to have this here now. So I'm not going to use it. And also, I think that when I was starting, I wasn't really sure how I was shooting when the night was falling, and I was a bit confused of what is it working. I'm finding that this gallery is really beautiful. I love the get ready. It's one of my favorite moments to shoot. But I was finding that as the night was setting, it wasn't aligning with what. So I thought, what's working? And I found that, for me, pushing the film so it really looks like the night is setting, keeping the ambiance. Film, candle lights and fairy lights just renders so beautiful, so beautifully on film. So, and then I do find that no one really wants like flash pictures when, people are having dinner, unless it's like a hand shot of like food being served. That's quite fun. Speeches, you don't want to be like flashing someone when they're crying during a speech. Delaying flash has been like a real, and sometimes not using it at all. It's just been like a real eye opening. I thought that. So I think I'm more excited about, building something that's quite strong and that feels like a really strong story from beginning to end, and, shooting film and more like pushing the film and sometimes using some like fun flash shots. A lot of the, at the moment, say like if it's, a cake cutting, I'm finding the images of, people cutting a cake behind, in front of a wall just a bit. Like how can we make this more interesting? How about we invite some people, not to be, on their iPhones, taking pictures, but I don't know, how can we I'm not about their, I'm not art directing their wedding photos, but I do think it's important to advise couples of like, oh, that would look really interesting, if we maybe did things like that. And that might be, and then maybe sending them example and, because that's kind of, an option for them. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that because it sounds almost like you know your voice, you know the way that you sound, and you're just trying to learn how to speak like you in a wider such a variety of situations. Like this is my aesthetic, this is what it looks and feels like. When is it unclear? And it's more a case of like removing things to align with your taste. That's such an interesting perspective because it shows that your visual understanding is so advanced compared to maybe your technical skills are kind of lagging behind a
Mm,
little bit. But
yeah.
that's not to say you're not capable, that you've spoken deeply on all the topics that you need to talk about. It's just for a lot of photographers, it's the opposite. They're very capable of taking a photograph but have nothing to say or don't know what an image should look like. And for you, because of how specific you are with your aesthetic, it's almost like this is challenging. How do I make it so that I can come up to that challenge and say what I want to say clearly every single time? It's such an interesting and refreshing perspective because it's a reminder for all of us to try and think about the end result that we're trying for, the aesthetic that we want. What are we doing as a photographer to elevate what's in front of us? Again, like constantly in awe of the way your brain works. It's fantastic. And like with that said, like I'm trying to think about how we can make this applicable to other people because obviously for you, you've had this multi-discipline career over years and design and fashion and commercial business running and then weddings and you've gone through all these different permutations. But all the way through your career, you've been doing something creative and something that requires a visual maturity. So if there's somebody else out there that's in a similar position to you, where they're a creative person and for whatever reason they feel like they need to move on to the next thing, is there any advice that you could give to them about moving into photography specifically or just moving on in general?
In terms of, well, if it was wedding photography anyway, it would be, I mean, it's interesting to see, what other wedding photographers, and I did, spend quite a lot of time on Instagram, looking at, oh, this person is shooting things like this. Is this what it was? Look, what things at the moment, at the time, I wasn't really understanding, you know, but I think it's so important to, I don't want to sound cheesy, but to look at other inspiration outside of the wedding world. Because if you're honest about really love this and you kind of stay away from what others is doing, there's obviously a lot of wedding photographers out there. And I think if you stay honest to, obviously you're going to love, certain things about, photography and films, and that's going to inspire your work, and you're going to come on this wedding day and you're going to have your voice and you'll be able to stay true to that rather than think, I must get the shot of the couple, that portrait because I saw that, that's really what
It did
anti-bride,
really well on
is like
Instagram
posting
last
a lot,
time.
is really well on Instagram. So I think, yeah, I think that's important in terms of just taking, more and more and more, and just really try to, yeah, to stay true to what you inspires you, I think is important.
And it's so clear that you're doing that in your own career as well. Like looking at the way that your work, it's not. I would not say that it's fashion led as much as I would say that it's clear that you understand the way that people dress themselves. It's clear that you understand the way that people hold themselves, and you understand the kinds of things that people that care about their appearance worry about, and that comes across so strongly. When I look at a lot of work, it is something missing. And like you said, if you continue to borrow for the same inspiration sources as everybody else, you are what you eat. Your work's going to look similar. That's really great advice, Charlotte, and thank you for that. Now, we're about to wrap up. I wanted to thank you for the time you spent so far because
Thank you
we've
so
been
much for
talking.
asking me to
This has
speak.
been
I'm
great.
very honored.
Well, it's been fantastic, and again, like I said, you're somebody that comes up in conversation all the time. Speaking of that, like I'm trying to work out who you would enjoy hearing on a format like this. So, is there anybody that you'd like me to interview next? Any creatives at all from any discipline?
I find that a lot of the work, on weddings is, someone that I find has a real honest voice. Sophie Davidson, I think that her work feels really chic and elevated, and it
It's
doesn't feel
incredible.
cliche wedding photography at all. And it just feels really honest. And I think, yeah, again, like elevated and chic. And I always, when I see that, what she posts, I think that you really see that this is a Sophie Davidson picture. And um Yeah.
Like some of the most honest, like down to earth photography. Like Sophie is a lovely person and has incredible work. I'll make sure we link to her website as well. But with all that said, is there anything else that you'd like to kind of tell the people listening, or anything you wanted to kind of add?
I think for me, you know, transitioning into this wedding photography, it felt really scary, and it's absolutely necessary for growth, as human beings, to put yourself out of the comfort zone. Shooting film is really scary, but again, as soon as you find a camera that you like working with, and a couple of like film stocks that that like, really love the colors, and you're not underexposing, an incredible experience. And I feel so lucky to be able to come on a day where there's so many emotions happening, you're there to capture it. So yeah, I think just if that's something that you feel you want to do more of, is go for it 100%.
That Charlotte, that's a really positive note to end on. So with that said, thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. And that's it. That's the whole thing.
My God.